Wayland on KDE Plasma is 80 to 90% there, but there are a few key showstoppers that may make it the wrong choice for you. In this video, we're going to take a look at my overall experience, as well as some of the pros, the cons, and the showstoppers. For context, a showstopper is something that would prevent a project from going live. So these are my biggest problems with Wayland. But first, let's talk about my previous experience with Wayland last year and get to some of the positive things, because there was some really good stuff here. I tried Wayland around this time last year, actually, and I had a rough time of it. My machine would go to sleep and then I would not be able to unlock it. I had some other weirdness. I wasn't able to capture video in OBS. Generally, all those issues are gone. So that is a step in the right direction for Wayland. So the first positive is better multi-monitor support. So my setup's a bit weird. I have a 4K monitor over here, and I have a 21.9 1440p monitor over here to my right. You don't ever see me record on that because YouTube aspect ratio is generally best at 16:9, and it would be a little awkward to try to switch between the two. Eventually, maybe we will. But I do often use that as a second monitor, but it's mostly used with other machines. It has multiple machines plugged into it. With X11, I had a bit of a rough time with this setup. I would turn the 1440p monitor over to my content creation machine. It would not automatically enable itself in Plasma, so I'd have to go in and do that. And then I would generally end up having the primary monitor switch to that monitor, and I'd have to switch it back. It was a whole thing that, it's not a difficult thing, but it was an annoyance when I just wanted the extra screen real estate to try to record YouTube or something like that. And at this point, I can't actually get it to cooperate correctly in X11. I need to do some research on getting this to work because it is pretty annoying to only be able to use one monitor or the other. But in Wayland, it pretty much just works. You turn it on, you set it up, and after that, it's been pretty flawless in picking up both. The other aspect of this is that scaling in Wayland is much better. I think the Plasma taskbar looks much better in Wayland than it does in X11 when I scale up my monitors. It's also really awesome that I can scale each monitor differently. So since I'm running 4K on one monitor and 1440p on another, I like to have like 200% on the 4K and about 150% on the 1440p. This makes it easier for me to look at and also makes it easier to display on video. The other nice thing is I can also set the frame rate on the two monitors independently. This 4K monitor, it has 120 Hz mode. This 21.9 monitor, it only goes up to 60 Hz. So in X, I don't believe you can actually set these to be different frequencies. And finally, in OBS, I generally get a lot less frame drops from render lag. And that's a good thing. I still need to research this a bit more and do some more digging because it's still not perfect, but it is better than it was in X11. So let's get some of the not so great stuff. First, some legacy apps do not scale well. We saw this in my initial video with Reaper, and then I had the update to change the option to use the app for scaling. And it works, but it also kind of defeats the purpose of using Wayland for scaling, because the entire point of Wayland scaling, as I understand it, is that it is doing a better job scaling, and thus you're not getting blurriness. So if your app doesn't support Wayland, you have to essentially make it so that all legacy apps scale themselves and thus end up being blurry. So it defeats the purpose a little bit, but I guess it is better than, the tiny UI options that I had in Reaper, because that was impossible to use any of the menus. A big thing for some people is that the vast majority of NVIDIA settings don't work in Wayland. There's very little I can actually change here. If you notice, I go to the graphics menu and there's literally nothing there. And some people, that's really important. It's not as big of a deal for me, as I'm not doing gaming as much on this PC. I do want to do a bit more so that I can, try to cover more gaming stuff in Linux. But ultimately, it's something where, as an NVIDIA user, that's just an option where I can't really change that. I'd have to go to X and turn on persistent mode and make any changes that I need there. And that's not a big deal, but it is, again, just kind of an annoyance. And I did do some research into this just to see if this has changed, but even as of just like a week ago, I could find people still kind of talking about this. And the other thing that is kind of an issue for me in Wayland is that global hotkeys aren't a thing for OBS specifically. So I can't actually try to change scenes without having a focus be on OBS. And, you know, this is just an inconvenience, and those little paper cuts for some people really add up. For a lot of what I'm doing, it's not as big of a deal, but that one is probably the biggest one when it comes to the things I typically do on this computer, just because I have OBS up so much on this computer. And now we get to the showstoppers. So for the first about 2 weeks, this was a pretty boring challenge. I wasn't really having many issues. I had the scaling issue that I figured out and posted the update about. But then I tried to join a Zoom call. And yeah, it did not go well. I could barely even actually type my name in to get to the actual meeting. And once I was in the meeting, I was getting nothing from the camera. My camera was not really showing that I was actually moving. It was rough. And then about 5 minutes later, Zoom crashed. And I quickly realized what I had changed was Wayland. I thought it may have been a Zoom update at first or something like that, but no, I checked for updates even. But no, then I realized it's Wayland. I did go back and record some footage just to try to give you an example of what this looks like. It's not quite as bad as it was that day, but as you can see, I try to share my screen and it literally pops up and tells me I have to use X11 unless I'm on GNOME. So it's kind of rough right now on Plasma, Wayland, and Zoom altogether. Furthermore, I ended up jumping into a Google Meets meeting with somebody else, and I tried to share my screen at one point. And I got the exact thing that I got in OBS last year. I got a black screen with a cursor, and that's it. I couldn't actually share anything else. And I tried to share just a window. I tried to share the entire screen. Neither one seemed to work in Google Meets via Firefox. Maybe there's a way I could do it via Chrome, but I just don't use Chrome. So I did some digging. I didn't really see anything that stood out to me, but if there's an answer out there beyond Chrome, I'm open to hear it. And those are two things where I had to switch back to X11 to get them to work. So if you do any screen sharing or you're using Zoom, especially if you're not using GNOME, then Wayland right now is not an option. If you're doing this few and far between and you can plan ahead, then maybe you just switch to X and use that for your sessions where you need to share your screen or need to Zoom or whatever. But that to me is a pretty big issue for somebody like me that's using this machine primarily for content creation and some business stuff. Now, the question you may be asking, will I still be using Wayland? And I think that's going to depend on what I find out as I research further into my OBS issues and my MultiMonitor issues in X. If I can figure out how to get OBS to work a bit better with X11 and I can get my MultiMonitor issues straightened out, I'll probably switch back to X. But if I can't, then I guess I'll be sticking on Wayland for a little while unless I need to hop in on a Zoom call or something like that. Overall, I was fairly pleased until I got to that Zoom call. I was very frustrated when I realized what was happening, because we were trying to get something going, and yeah, it was not a fun evening to realize that, oh, it's Wayland causing the issue as opposed to, a system update or something like that. But like I say, overall, it's worked fairly well. I am curious to see what it will look like this time next year. If I do switch back to X, I'll probably be redoing this challenge this time next year just to see where we are. Because I feel like every time I kind of look at it and every time I kind of hear people talking about it, it's like Wayland is this far away. Unfortunately, this amount, that 10, 20%, it's a big one for certain people. For others, it may be nothing. Have you had any other issues in Wayland, especially in Plasma? If so, feel free to sound off in the comments below. Hopefully with some time, we'll get those global hotkeys and some other niceties with Wayland, and it won't be quite so hit and miss on what works and what doesn't, especially in Plasma. Thanks for watching, have a great day, and I'll see you next time.